From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm David Gura.
Tonight, the high-pressure Oval Office meeting to reset a key alliance.
Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together.
The D.C. encounter a week in the making after Mark Carney won his national election by promising voters he can guide Canada through the economic turmoil of the trade war kicked off by President Trump. Reporting and analysis coming up.
Plus, the Treasury Secretary's congressional grilling and the true state of those White House-China trade talks.
We are currently negotiating with 17 of those trading partners. China, we have not engaged in negotiations with as of yet. Many of our trading partners have approached us with very good offers, and we are in the process of renegotiating those.
What we learned from Secretary Scott Bessent today as he testified pushing the president's budget before lawmakers amid increasing global trade tensions and a ticking debt limit clock on the eve of the Federal Reserve's meeting. All the developments up ahead when Budget Committee Chairman Representative Jodey Arrington and Texas Senator John Cornyn join us here on Balance of Power.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy tells Americans it is safe to fly after major delays at one of the country's busiest airports. We sit down with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer as he calls for an FAA investigation.
And the historic defeat turned parliamentary win. We are in Germany after Conservative leader Friedrich Merz won a parliament vote to become Germany's next chancellor on his second attempt. But we begin tonight with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to the White House today. Bloomberg's Laura Davison, our Deputy Bureau Chief in Washington, joins us now. Laura, great to have you here. And let's just talk about how this meeting unfolded. There was so much uncertainty about how these leaders would act with one another, what the rhetoric would be like. I would venture to say Mark Carney played this one pretty well.
Yes, everyone was thinking back to the meeting with Zelensky a couple months ago that was quite tense and ended in flared tensions. None of that was there today. Even some of the, animosity that Trump had shown towards Trudeau, Carney's predecessor wasn't there. He, even at a White House event just moments ago, Trump said he wasn't even going to call Carney governor, as he did with Trudeau. He, mentioned the 51st state thing. Carney said, no, we're not going to do that. But both leaders were very complimentary of one another and indicated that these trade talks could move forward.
You touched on the 51st state coming up today, and he's saying that he's not going to do that. Both men have to appeal to their constituencies about this. How is the relationship with them moving forward?
So both of them, sort of kind of set the ground here. There was essentially a reset in the relationship from what we've seen between Canada and the U.S. It's clear that both sides realize they need a deal. And even Trump, more so than he was even, 3 or 4 weeks ago, was sort of saying, hey, we don't need these deals. Now it's clear that the White House is angling for some of these deals. We heard that from Scott Bessent on the Hill today. Trump said that he will be setting the terms, but it's clear that every time he's come out and said, look, we're going to negotiate, we're going to have a win here. But he really needs some of these countries and some of these deals to come through to assure markets, investors, and the Republican Party.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison, thank you so much for being with us. And from the White House to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, where lawmakers are running full speed at finalizing a budget and tax bill, looking to fulfill the president's promise to dramatically downsize the federal government while enacting permanent tax cuts. This as the country heads to the debt limit X date. Here's what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had to say about that when testifying on Capitol Hill today.
We will share with Congress when we believe we are approximating that date. So that will be forthcoming. But I will tell you, just as an outfielder running for a fly ball, we are on the warning track. And when you're on the warning track, it means the wall's not far away.
Joining us now live from Capitol Hill is Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas. Thanks so much for being with us, Senator.
Great to be with you both.
I want to start with the budget. You sit on that committee. There are calls for major cuts, including cuts to Medicaid. That is a red line for some of your colleagues. So what is it going to take to get it through?
Well, I think the consensus is there should not be any cuts to safety net programs like Medicaid to benefits per se, but there's a lot of money that's being wasted in Medicaid as it currently operates. And I think it's only common sense to say for these means-tested programs, in other words, you need to meet certain income levels in order to qualify, that able-bodied adults ought to work, and they ought to provide for themselves and their families and their communities and not take a free ride on taxpayers. So there's a lot of different components of this, as you know. We got to get the tax cuts that are expiring reauthorized, or that will be a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase. We can't let that happen on top of 40-year high inflation that we've seen coming out of the Biden administration. And then we need to deal with the debt. We're close to $37 trillion in debt. We're spending more money on interest on the national debt than we are on defense, which is an unsustainable situation. So this is very complicated, very hard, but failure is not an option.
Senator, something that you've been pushing for is reimbursement from the federal government for money that Texas has spent on securing the border with Mexico. Obviously, you and your colleagues are competing to get money as a result of these negotiations. How do you foresee navigating that and getting the money that you think that Texas deserves here?
Well, we're talking to the decision makers, the president, the speaker, and the majority leader of the Senate. And the Texas delegation, which is a large delegation, I think has a lot of clout. We don't necessarily always use it the way we might for our advantage, but here it's just a matter of basic fairness. Texas expended roughly $11.1 billion to secure the border when the Biden administration was AWOL, and getting repaid, it just seems like a matter of fairness, because this is not a burden that should fall on a state. This is an international border. It's a federal responsibility, and I'm optimistic that working with President Trump, Speaker Johnson, and Majority Leader Thune, that we will get this done as part of this larger reconciliation package.
Senator, you have voted with the president almost all of the time, but even some in your own party are questioning the tariff policy. We come from a state, I'm the Texas bureau chief, we come from a state where there are a lot of automakers, there are a lot of CEOs. What are you hearing from them about these tariffs?
Well, as you know, tariffs are not new, but President Trump believes they provide a lot of leverage in negotiating these deals. And the truth is, a lot of countries have taken advantage of the United States by creating tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade that disadvantage the United States, and frankly are a reason why a lot of manufacturing has gone offshore, and now we are seeing the consequences of that. So I'm hopeful that Secretary Bessent, who is negotiating these hopefully zero-based tariff agreements with all of these countries that have now approached the administration, will get there sooner rather than later. I think it would be helpful if the administration starts rolling out some of these examples of countries where they've negotiated successfully, because it'll lay out more or less the framework or the template for what future negotiations should look like. So, but there is obviously President Trump's a disruptor, and there's been some disruption, but I think he recognizes the importance of getting this resolved relatively soon.
Senator, I can think of a few of your colleagues who have more experience in the national security space. You sit on the Foreign Relations Committee. You're on the Intelligence Committee as well. We know that Mike Waltz, the president's national security advisor, is now being moved over to the United Nations to be the U.S. ambassador to the UN if the president gets his way. We had your colleague Chris Coons on the show a few days ago, and we asked him about what next steps should be in sort of investigating what happened with the use of this signal messaging platform. Let's take a listen to what Senator Coons had to say.
He certainly had his critics in the Republican caucus as well as in the Democratic caucus.
When these hearings begin, will you subpoena Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic to find out how he got on that phone?
Well, we should, but bluntly, the issuance of a subpoena by the committee requires votes from the majority, not just the minority.
What kind of cooperation do you think you'll have from the Republican leadership?
Probably pretty minimal.
Senator Coons, they're predicting minimal support there for that subpoena. Do you favor subpoenaing the editor of the Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg, as this investigation continues?
Well, I think we need to have an investigation into the use of Signal, period. We've heard from some of the folks like CIA Director Ratcliffe and others that when they moved into their office, Signal was already installed on their phone, on their computers. And clearly, this is not a government encrypted program. It is encrypted end to end, but it's a private app. And I think it's created a situation where, fortunately, as a result of Senator Wicker, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, working with Vice Chairman or Ranking Member Reid on the Armed Services Committee, they've called for an independent investigation by the Inspector General at the Department of Defense. I think that will provide the information we need to find out what happened and to fix this problem, because it clearly is a problem.
Senator, I want to talk a little bit about the CBP app. Kristi Noem now offering migrants $1,000 through the app if they self-deport. Are you satisfied that this administration, which has promised the largest deportation in history, is doing enough to secure the border and with deportations?
Well, Julia, that's one thing that we can claim 100% success by President Trump and his policies. And we discovered, contrary to what you heard in the previous administration, we don't need new laws. We just need a president committed to enforcing the law and securing the border. And that's happening as we speak. There's still a lot of people in the country that ICE has identified, people with criminal records and who need to be returned to their country of origin. There are also more than 1 million people with final orders of deportation. There's been a lot of discussion about due process for these migrants, and these are people who've had all the process they are due and have simply just decided to stay in the United States, knowing that the Biden administration would not remove them. Obviously, this is a new day with President Trump in charge, and we need to secure our border, which he's doing, but we also need to make sure that when the people come to our country, they come through legal means. Our legal immigration system is really one of our crown jewels in America. It's part of what's made our country exceptional, but illegal immigration has been an unmitigated disaster.
Senator, last question here. You're in a tight race with Ken Paxton. He, of course, has a good relationship with the president. You do as well. Are you expecting the endorsement of President Trump in that race?
Well, I talk to President Trump frequently. As Julie said, I've been supportive of him during his first term and have continued to be. And frankly, I think Texas needs somebody who will be effective in this important Senate seat at a time especially like this, because of the uncertainty domestically and the challenges we face abroad internationally. So I don't know whether President Trump will ultimately end up making an endorsement. He may wait to see how the race develops, but I certainly am not going to turn over representation of 31 million Texans to somebody with the character problems that Ken Paxton has. It's well documented, but the truth is it's sort of like an onion. The more you peel back, there's more underneath it. And the truth is he is not fit to be the next United States Senator.
Senator Cornyn, thank you very much for the time. That's Republican Senator John Cornyn of the state of Texas joining us here on Balance of Power. Well, from one side of the aisle to the other, amid a budget fight and much more, coming up, our conversation with the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer. Coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio.
So I think Newark is safe. Listen, I fly to that airport all the time. My family flies out. But just in regard to traffic, some people, because they're concerned about delays, may make choices to go to Philly or LaGuardia or JFK.
That was Sean Duffy, the U.S. Transportation Secretary, defending the safety of Newark International Airport after an incident where air traffic controllers lost radar and radio communication for over a minute on April 28th, causing flight delays and cancellations. Now, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is calling for an investigation into those flight and airport issues. This afternoon, we had the chance to speak with the senator about the FAA investigation and ongoing budget negotiations in Congress. I started by asking whether he believes Americans are safe when they fly.
Look, I'm not going to dispute the FAA when they say that, but you can't be too careful. And things are safe until they're not safe, as we learned at DCA. And so the bottom line is there are lots of questions about how they have handled themselves. First, the firing of so many employees under DOGE has weakened the FAA. Second, a good number of top-level people who are concerned with air safety and flight safety have left out of exasperation because they think the people who have been put in charge don't know what they're doing. And third, the FAA increased bonuses to attract more people in the towers and keep them in the towers for 13 cities, but not Philadelphia, New York, or Washington. That seems to me to be ridiculous. So there are so many questions that have not been answered yet. And, you know, one word that describes this administration is chaos. There's no place worse to have chaos, very few places, than an airport. Yet that's what's happening at Newark, and it's spreading around the country.
Senator Schumer, do you believe then that DOGE is to blame and these cuts are to blame for what you are seeing in the air right now?
All the reports we get from people who work there is the cuts have hurt and there is no rhyme or reason to them. They're just cutting for cutting's sake, and it's very bad. And we talk to people who are in the towers.
I want to pivot here to ask you about the budget process, which, of course, is ongoing and being driven here by Republicans. They talk about there being waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid to the tune of $600 billion. Do you think that that is findable in that way? And how do you sort of see Democrats responding to Republicans pushing this forward?
No. Yeah, we ask them, give us specific examples of waste when they're cutting Medicaid. And they fail to come up with them or have one anecdotal thing that can't even be proven. We know that they want to slash Medicaid, not because of waste, but for one reason, and that is to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country. You know, God bless the people who made a lot of money, but they don't need a tax break, certainly when you're cutting Medicaid, which is going to cause huge layoffs, decline in health care, and closure of hospitals and nursing homes. I was on Staten Island, a Republican area, a few weeks ago with the health leaders, and they estimate that there would be 18,000 people who would lose their jobs under these cuts. That would send that whole economy of Staten Island into a recession. So they use excuses because they just want to slash the budget. And they don't come up with anything specific, nor do they come up with specific solutions how to end waste. People show up Friday night at home after a hard week of work, and online is you're fired, don't show up at the office. These people have dedicated their lives to helping people, and they're not even given an explanation of why they're fired because DOGE doesn't have one. They just want to slash.
Now, there are those in your own party, though, that have said there need to be changes when it comes to spending. Where would you suggest cuts?
Well, look, first, no one's against cutting waste, but you got to document it. You just don't tell somebody they're part of waste without giving them any explanation, any evidence. But there are obviously places that can be cut throughout the budget. But you've got to be careful. You've got to use a scalpel, not a chainsaw. You know, when Elon Musk gets there smiling that he's using a chainsaw to government, doesn't he realize he's hurting millions of people?
And that was Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. You can find the full conversation with the senator online or on the terminal. Coming up, Chancellor Merz secured parliamentary backing as Germany's new chancellor after a shocking initial defeat. Details on the election and a look at the major issues the new chancellor now faces next on Bloomberg and Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside David Gura. I'm Julie Fine. Germany has a new chancellor after a dramatic day in the capital. Chancellor Merz eventually earned parliamentary backing and was sworn into office, but only after overcoming a shocking first-round loss. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook has more from Berlin.
After a day of political upheaval here in Germany, the nation finally has a new chancellor, Friedrich Merz. This was supposed to be a procedural process. This was supposed to be brought before the parliament. They were supposed to vote, and then the new chancellor was to be sworn in. That is not what happened. In the very first hours, in the very first stumbling block, the parliament failed to get that majority, and Friedrich Merz's future as the chancellor of Germany was put on hold. That led lawmakers and journalists alike to grab for the German constitution, because this has literally never happened, in order to understand procedurally how to go forward. They later held a vote later in the afternoon, and Friedrich Merz finally was able to pass and be announced and elected Chancellor of Germany. And this was supposed to be a moment in which you end the political upheaval of the last government, which fell prematurely back in November, and to usher a new age of German stability and able to deal with the litany of issues that lie before the German economy. Whether it's the fact that it's been in contraction for the last 2 years, whether it's the fact that there are these tariffs coming from Donald Trump, the question of foreign policy and the lack of leadership within Europe, Friedrich Merz really wanted to cast himself as that strong leader of Germany and potentially within Europe. And he comes into the office now with great doubts about how strong this coalition is and how effective they're going to be at governing, particularly with the deployment of that 1 trillion euros worth of debt finance assets to build out infrastructure and to build out the defense industry. How certain are they that they're going to have the agreements in order to effectively deploy that capital in a day that was supposed to bring political stability into Germany? Really has brought a lot of sort of chaos and a lot of sort of doubt about the future of this coalition government.
As our colleague Oliver Crook in Berlin on what was an extraordinary day in German politics, the development out of Germany. Just one of the global headlines we are following tonight after we have word that India's army has carried out strikes at terror camps in Pakistan. The attack was widely expected after it pledged retaliations for an attack last month in Kashmir that killed 26 people. President Trump commented on the conflict and said he hopes the situation gets resolved. Just an incredibly eventful day here. Julie, of course, what happened in Germany, obviously what happened in India with India and Pakistan, and in the White House as well, this meeting between President Trump and Mark Carney.
Which is interesting, too, because you look at what happened in Germany and then you look at what happened in the White House. And all of this, when these things happen, you really get back to tariffs and trade and how it's going to affect everything.
So much of what was discussed in the Oval Office was about that. We heard the president say he's putting aside all of this talk about sovereignty in the 51st state, focusing instead on those trade deals, but really in broad strokes. But that's what's animating those conversations, as you say, in the White House, in the Oval Office, and certainly what's kind of fueling geopolitics around the world. Yes, in Europe and in Asia as well, and something we're tracking here day in and day out here on Balance of Power. Well, coming up are conversations with Republican Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri, Jodey Arrington of Texas. He's the chair of the House Budget Committee regarding the budget markup. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio.
We didn't want to move this quickly, speed for the sake of speed. We want to get it right. We'll send them by the end of next week to the Budget Committee, and Chairman Arrington then and his team will take that and merge it all together, and we'll have the one big, beautiful bill ready to go. Stop doubting us. We're going to get this job done, okay?
House Speaker Mike Johnson earlier today offering a progress report on President Trump's tax bill. Two key players in enacting that agenda are Congressman Jodey Arrington of Texas, chair of the House Budget Committee, and Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri, chair of the House Ways and Means Committee.
We talked to both lawmakers this afternoon in two separate interviews. First, here's part of my interview with Chairman Smith. You've said you want to deliver a budget with tax cuts to the president by Memorial Day. Do you think right now you can realistically still hit that time frame?
We absolutely can deliver it to the president by July 4th. That has been a goal of mine for a long time. Of course, this is a very big bill. The president calls it the one big, beautiful bill. It will have border policy. It will have defense. It will have spending cuts, but also it will make sure that it allows permanency of President Trump's expiring 2017 tax provisions, but also new provisions that he campaigned on, like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, tax relief for seniors, but we can put that on the desk by July 4th. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. We have very narrow, thin margins, both in the House and the Senate, but we're going to get it done.
You've discussed cuts to Medicaid. Are you confident you can get all Republicans on board, or certainly, enough to get this done without Democrats? Many who have said that is a red line for them.
The president's been very clear. He does not want to cut eligibility and benefits to people on Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. He's looking at possibly work requirements. He's open to making sure illegals aren't receiving benefits. That's another item that he's looking at. But in regards to finding spending cuts, there's numerous ways we can find spending cuts. One example is to eliminate some bad tax policy. There's hundreds of billions of dollars within the Green New Deal tax scam that was passed. And that can be used to pay for all of these items like no tax on tips, tax relief for seniors, and no tax on overtime.
How high could the deduction limit go? $25,000 has been suggested, but New York and California Republicans have said that isn't enough.
So balancing all the different items within the tax code is super important. We have some members who would like an unlimited SALT deduction. We have others that don't want you to even be able to deduct $1 for SALT. I have to have all the members. I can only lose 3 to pass this bill. So it's really threading a needle and balancing it to find the right number. $10,000 is not satisfactory. We're going to have to increase it, but we're going to find a fair balance. Typically, the number that we'll find will probably make everyone unhappy, and so that means it's probably the right number.
When you talk about 3, that is a low number. How do you get everybody on board for all the different things they want for specific states? How do you do that?
One big, beautiful bill is how we will do that, because it's a balancing approach. Like I said, there's going to be things that you absolutely love, and there's going to be some other things that you don't like nearly as much. And so the overall picture of this bill, the border security, the homeland security, the spending cuts, and also the tax cuts for working families, small businesses, and farmers, you have to look at all of it together and how that delivers real results for the people who we represent.
And that was Republican Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri, chair of the House Ways and Means Committee.
We also sat down with Republican Congressman Jodey Arrington of Texas, Smith's colleague on the Ways and Means Committee, but also chair of the House Budget Committee. We discussed the impending budget negotiations and whether the House Republican caucus can remain intact. Take a listen. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being here. I want to start just with the timetable for all of these negotiations. I know the Republican conference met this morning. What can you tell us just about sort of where things stand? We've heard Memorial Day, July 4th. Realistically, when is all this going to come together?
Well, I don't think anybody anticipated we could move this quickly. And in the history of reconciliation, which is a budget tool that came out of the 1974 Budget Act, we've never moved at this clip. And we've hit every milestone in the time frame that we've set, because we know how important it is to give the president all the tools that he needs, whether it's on the security side or to move this economy off high center and really start to grow again. There's no reason to believe at this point we're going to miss the last hurdle to get it to the Senate and then on to the president's desk. Our time frame has been by Memorial Day. Obviously, the Senate is somewhat delayed. We're driving it. We have driven it from the beginning. When I say we, the House.
The House,
yeah. Because I think the Senate, number one, was probably distracted with Senate confirmation hearings. We've been planning for this moment for months. And so it's paying off. We're moving, I think, with unprecedented speed. We're all unified. We know there's tension between various groups within the conferences, and that's understandable. But we've got to meet these budget targets that we set in the House. We've got to have the House framework drive it, because it's the only fiscally responsible set of budget targets among the two chambers, where whatever we do on tax and whatever investments we make in security, it's going to be offset by growth and spending reductions.
So I look at your conference, and there are these kind of pay-for hardliners like Chip Roy, another gentleman from Texas. How confident are you that you're going to have some unanimity among you? Are you maybe describe how monumental the task is of getting everybody on board with this. Then how are you going to do it? And is the president, has he volunteered to help do that?
Well, we set budget targets for the 11 committees that are involved in this on the spending side, or what will cost us on border security, defense, and tax, and on the savings side per committee. And we were able to thread the needle with a 1-vote margin and pass it because everybody was linked. Everybody's interest was linked. Everybody was motivated to lean in so that we could have the fullness of the tax policies that would generate the biggest economic return, because we know we need all the help we can get. And so I think that tying all of it together was the key. And the commitment has been there. The progress is being made by each committee in a way that gives me confidence we're going to meet those targets. But then the question will be, when we send it to the Senate, will it come back intact? Will the integrity of that framework be intact? That's a bigger question. But in terms of whether the House will get there, I still think there will be debate, even if we meet the targets. Did we do enough on entitlement reform? Did we do enough to send the signal to the bond markets, who are concerned that nobody in Washington is going after the debt drivers, which is mandatory spending? Will we do enough where they will say, you know what, we have more confidence that our best days are ahead of us, and we start seeing not only the debt come down, but the interest on the debt and the premium we're paying on behalf of because of the risks, because of the increased risks. And we're paying $1 trillion just to service the debt, which is more than we spend on all of defense, more than we spend in Medicare benefits. So it's a huge problem, and it's a huge moment to address that problem and not just cut taxes and increase defense spending. That Republicans do that in their sleep. This moment calls for us to do so much more, because that business as usual approach has left us with this mountain of World War levels of debt and deficits. And it's going to require unprecedented strength, courage of conviction, and political will to take it head on.
You can find the full conversations with House Ways and Means Chair Jason Smith of Missouri and House Budget Chair Jodey Arrington on the terminal. Coming up, we'll assemble this evening's political panel to discuss the implications of President Trump's meeting with Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney today at the White House. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Congressman, I believe in data, and there is nothing in the data that shows that we are in a recession.
When is X date?
We don't have. We will share with Congress when we believe we are approximating that date. We are on the warning track, and when you're on the warning track, it means the wall's not far away. DOGE is the Office of Government Efficiency, not the Office of Government Extinction or eradication.
Who pays tariffs?
Sorry,
Mr. Secretary, please.
Excuse me.
The question is very simply, who pays tariffs, Mr. Chairman? I'd like him to answer that question.
Well,
he wants to answer other questions.
Well, Congressman, if the Congressman.
So I'll ask one more time, who pays tariffs?
Sir, the history would show that it is a complicated mix of who pays the tariffs over various times.
That there, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent testifying before the House Appropriations Committee, answering questions on everything from tariffs, as you heard there, to the CBO's X date. For reaction, let's turn to this evening's political panel. Adam Hodge, Managing Director at Bully Pulpit International and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Adam, let me turn to you first. We're talking about the X date. We had a Treasury Secretary sitting before that committee very keen, I think, not to talk about trade, wanted to have the conversation about taxes. Of course. As all of this roiling debate over these trade policies continues. Your sense of the role that he's playing as this week progresses. He was at Milken yesterday talking to investors. He's up on the Hill talking his book to lawmakers today.
He's clearly growing in stature within the Trump administration and clearly has more authority over broader economic policy than he did at the beginning of the administration. But the questions that he was answering were pretty straightforward, and he clearly cannot still take the ire of the president by criticizing and speaking truth about what happens with tariffs. We know it's paid by American companies. They're paying it right now. That's why you're seeing, there's a great story in Bloomberg today about one container ship coming from China was $417 million worth of tariffs on that one ship. That is like that's be multiplied across the economy. 35% drop in the Port of LA estimates in shipping containers in the next couple weeks. So that's a real problem.
So, Lisa, what is the strategy here? Because he's going to be asked these questions wherever he goes. Some audiences more friendly than others. Capitol Hill, a different story. So what should be the strategy in terms of dealing with all of this that's going to continue to come his way?
Oh, I'd like to think there's a strategy, but unfortunately, I feel like he's been fed to the wolves, and he's a guy who doesn't feel like he has a lot of words that he can say out loud that isn't going to get him crossways with his boss. To me, if I'm consuming that from the White House, I'm not sure that his performance today is going to go over well inside the White House, because it seems to me like he was not well prepared to answer questions that he should have been prepared to answer. And that, I think, alone, doesn't that just give the markets a little bit of pause and a little bit of concern if you see that the Treasury Secretary, who, by the way, does move markets, react that way? To me, that's concerning from a communicator's point of view.
Give him all thoughts and prayers to him, because he's in a pretty impossible situation.
Agreed.
But it's still, you got to come up with something better than that today. And I think that has been the problem that they've had from the beginning for the first 110 days of the administration.
But what's interesting is it's not like this guy's in hiding. Everywhere you look, whether it's doing an interview, whether it's at Milken. Now, obviously, he has no choice to be on Capitol Hill, but he does have a choice to be in a lot of these other places. And this is not a guy who is hiding.
It's interesting to me, though, also that he is in a place where it is hard for him to answer the questions the way I think that he fundamentally would like to answer them, and is sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Adam, let me ask you just about, let me dovetail that with what happened in the Oval Office today, because there was this, not just a stylistic disconnect, but a disconnect on facts when it comes to where these trade talks are going. I'm curious sort of what you took away from that meeting with Mark Carney that the president had today. Not a whole lot of kind of notional progress on a trade deal between the U.S. and Canada, but your sense of how well that meeting went between these two leaders. It was one where there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding it.
I mean, Mark Carney probably should, when he walked in, give him a high five and say, thank you for putting me in this job, because he would not be the prime minister today without Donald Trump putting his foot in his mouth and putting his foot on the U.S.-Canada relationship.
And to President Trump's credit, he said as much there in that meeting. He said, I think I helped you out in this race.
He did. And I think, but Mike, he set expectations going in that there was not going to be some puff of white smoke about some major trade deal. And he spoke and stood up for Canada, as any Canadian prime minister would. I think the question, though, is like, when you look ahead, how they actually renegotiate USMCA. And Mark Carney will know the ins and outs of that agreement. He is very steeped in the markets and what the reaction is, and he can play that, I think, to Canada's advantage. I think the U.S. will find itself in a very difficult position where Canada and Mexico team up and try to put the U.S. in the defensive, and we'll see if they're successful.
One thing I wonder is if world leaders are looking at those meetings to say, okay, when it's my turn, how do I maneuver that? I mean, that went better than some others that we have seen in the Oval Office. I wonder if you can kind of shed some light on how world leaders view these.
Oh, they're watching them with bated breath to see how it's going to go down. No question about it. And they're thinking about how they're going to, each and every one of those meetings makes more news than they have ever made before out in any other White House, for sure. Ordinarily, it's a headline and it's a little bit of information and then they move along. This, to me, is definitely a must-see TV for other world leaders and how they're going to perform in the White House and how Donald Trump is going to react to them.
But let's be clear, like, Donald Trump loves the theater.
No question
right? I mean,
about it.
That is and it does move markets, and sometimes to the president's detriment.
I love after Gretchen Whitmer went there was this debate, did she know what she was getting into? Of course. I mean, that's how this is going to go now. If you go to the White House, you're going to end up in the Oval Office in front of some cameras. Picking up on the USMCA, markets reacted really favorably to President Trump not declaring that it's dead. all but praising that deal, indicating there might be some room for negotiation around the edges. How do you think about that, the way that he's now talking about trade in this context versus how aggressively he's talked about tariffs and the trade relationship in recent weeks?
It just strikes me that maybe he's taking a more thoughtful tone, or maybe the folks in the advisors circle are telling him to be more thoughtful about that, because as he thinks about all the political capital he's going to need to use to get that reconciliation package done in the Congress, how much more can these members, how much more pain can they suffer? So to me, that seems like it would be, back to Julie's question about strategy, that seems like a pretty good strategy to be more thoughtful and measured about how that goes. But we all know that this could change tomorrow and he could say something completely different.
Where were we on Sunday night?
Right.
We were, all of a sudden it was tariffs on Hollywood. Yeah. And I talked to some of my former colleagues at USTR who have no idea how you would put in tariffs on USMC, on movies made abroad, let alone the fact that it wouldn't actually solve the problem. And that was 48 hours ago. Where we'll be 48 hours from now, Canada and Mexico could be back on the chopping block. And that is the chaos and confusion that we hear from our clients and across the board in the economy, people on Bloomberg tuning in, who know that the uncertainty with the tariffs is really, and that is driving real business decisions. And that's why people are pessimistic about the economic results later this year.
Well, you do bring up the point about the movies happened on Sunday. Then Monday, President Trump was meeting with the entertainment industry. Again, that goes back to bringing more uncertainty. And that goes back to the beginning of this conversation. Scott Bessent taking all the incoming there.
No doubt about it. And it's all theater, and it's all so many things all at once. But everything that we've seen is that's precisely what the tactic is inside the White House, and to distract from just about everything else that's going on.
We've seen that movie before.
Been to that rodeo. Lisa Camuso Miller and Adam Hodge, thank you so much for being with us on the panel today. And coming up, India said it conducted military strikes against terrorist camps in Pakistan. What led to the attack? And more details next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio alongside Julie Fine. I'm David Gura, and we are following several global headlines tonight after we got news that India's army has carried out strikes at terror camps in Pakistan. The attacks widely expected after it pledged retaliation for an attack last month in Kashmir that killed 26 people. President Trump commented on the conflict and said he hopes the situation gets resolved. Pakistan's prime minister, however, said the country has every right to give a robust response to the, quote, act of war from India. Joining us now with more is Bloomberg's Jennifer Welch. Jennifer, great to have you with us. I wonder if you could just help us understand in kind of a broader context why this is such a significant development here in this part of the world.
Well, thanks so much for having me. So this is a very dynamic situation, and I want to be cautious about the fact that it's still evolving. In fact, we just got reports that Pakistan's army has been firing across the border. So there's likely to be continued developments even as I'm talking right here. But the context for all of this is that there have long been tensions between India and Pakistan, share a border, have a long history together, both nuclear armed states as well. But the last few years in particular have been a moment where there's been a ceasefire, and this incident has really threatened to return tensions to a level that they haven't been since at least 2019. And at this moment in time, we're also seeing heightened volatility on Pakistan's side, dealing with domestic political instability, dealing with economic crises. And I think all of that adds to the pressure and this powder keg and really underscores the volatility of this moment and the uncertainty about what happens next.
Jenny, it's well known that India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. Is there really a risk that a border dispute like this could go to that level?
I think at this moment in time, both sides probably have an incentive to respond and show strength, but also to keep tensions beyond the level of mutual self-harm. And I think the key question facing Pakistan is how it responds to this in a way that is proportional, but encounters that risk that it faces with India, which has a much larger conventional force against it. So what we've seen in 2019, for example, was Pakistan taking somewhat proportional measures to respond with strength, but then ultimately backing down in the face of international pressure. I think this time around, the question is, who has the juice with Pakistan to kind of walk it back from that edge? The United States, as you noted, President Trump has already commented on this, but it has been urging both sides to de-escalate since the initial attack in Kashmir. And so far, neither side seems to be listening to it. I think this, again, is a moment of volatility where it's unclear who's going to be able to step in and sort of push both sides back to their corners.
Jennifer Welch of Bloomberg Economics, thank you so much. And for all of the latest surrounding Congress and the Trump administration, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Well, thanks very much for joining us on Balance of Power. It's been a pleasure to fill in here with Julie Fine on Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg Radio. Kayleigh Lyons will be back with you tomorrow for another edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio worldwide. Great anchoring with you.
It was so great to be with you, David. We'd been emailed for a long time, and now we finally met.
We've met on set.
Met on set.